Does identity matter? Should you care which future thing you are numerically identical with? If so, why? This question arises because we've been discussing biological continuity views of personal identity. And it seems quite compelling to think that if biological continuity views are right, then which thing you're numerically identical with doesn't really matter for which thing you're morally responsible for. And in that case, it seems that the issue of personal identity isn't one that we should really care about in any interesting practical sense. So that's where we are. Now, let's take a look at what the philosopher Olsen says. So Olson, recall, is a defender of biological continuity views, and here's what he says. But before you read it, note that you might have the feeling that there are just too many words here. It turns out you can cut quite a lot of words and still get the point. And I like to do this. I think philosophers, perhaps many writers, use too many words. Not Jane Austen, right? Not the great writers, but ordinary writers use too many words. One thing that you and I can usefully do is just get rid of some of those words. Makes it easier to read and easier to understand. Sure, sometimes when I take words out, I destroy the sense or I make a mess of things, but it's still a good exercise for me to try to do this and understand it. Sometimes realizing that I've made a mistake by cutting things out is quite illuminating. Okay, so cut words out. Here's the shorter Olson. If, says Olson, practical concerns are closely connected with psychological continuity, then the biological approach does have an ethical consequence, namely that those practical relations are not necessarily connected with numerical identity. Right, so really Olson's saying the biological approach kind of has the consequence that ethical stuff isn't related to personal identity at all. So earlier we had this inconsistent triad for the view of biological continuity about personal identity. The idea is that we can't have these three claims and hold them all true. They can't all be true at once. So we can say that where Tom and Aisha swap brains for a day, and as you remember, Tom robs the bank, we could say that Tom is responsible for the actions performed in Aisha's body of robbing the bank. We can say that you're only responsible for the actions of things that are numerically identical with you. We can say that the biological continuity view of personal identity is correct. Remember what that says. We can't say that all three claims are true. Now, the passage that I just mentioned from Olson, that one, is really a defense, or contains a defense of biological continuity view. In that passage, Olson is implicitly rejecting one of these three claims. What I want you to do, ideally with a partner or some partners, is tell me which of these three claims is Olson rejecting. 90 seconds, go. Okay, so I hope that you've had a good think and a talk about that. And if you've been writing about that for me, I'm looking forward to seeing what you've said. Well done. Good. So Olson is clearly rejecting the second claim here, the claim that you're only responsible for things done by things that are numerically identical to you. I think there's a problem with rejecting this, and the problem is that "it wasn't me" seems like a very good excuse. So you say, look, Steve, you're guilty of driving into my car. And I say, it wasn't me. And that seems like I'm, if what I'm saying is true, I'm not guilty. But maybe there's a way around that. So that's the challenge for Olson in rejecting this claim. But certainly Olson wants to reject this claim, and surely he and some of the other philosophers have got some very smart things to say about that. Now, if we do reject that claim, then we can see how the biological continuity view of personal identity could be satisfactory.